Keith Urban walked on stage for his first show since Nicole Kidman quietly filed for divorce, and something felt off. For nearly 20 years, their marriage had been held up as one of Hollywood's most unbreakable. No public drama, no messy scandals, just devotion, loyalty, and love, at least on the surface. That's why the split blindsided everyone. And what's raising even more eyebrows now is who finally spoke out. Russell Crowe, one of Nicole Kidman's closest friends and someone who's been in her life long before Keith, has reportedly broken his silence. Not as a commentator, but as someone who saw the private moments the cameras never caught. Because according to what's being said, this wasn't a sudden breakup or a slow fade. There were signs, quiet shifts, and a final breaking point that stayed hidden until now. And once you understand what Russell Crowe allegedly witnessed from the inside, the quiet way this marriage ended starts to look far more deliberate and far more telling. Long before Nicole Kidman became one of the most powerful names in Hollywood, there was one person who never left her side. In an industry where friendships fade as fast as fame rises, Russell Crowe remained constant. Not a red carpet ally, not a temporary co-star, but a quiet presence who knew Nicole before the world did. Their bond didn't form under flashing cameras or at glamorous premieres. It began in the late 1980s, inside Australia's gritty film scene, when both were chasing careers that hadn't yet taken shape. They understood the sacrifices, the loneliness, the emotional cost of success, and that shared foundation created something rare in Hollywood: unshakable loyalty. Through public triumphs, private heartbreaks, and relentless media scrutiny, Russell was always there. When Nicole's marriage to Tom Cruise collapsed under global attention, he didn't speak. He stayed. That history is what makes his perspective different. He wasn't reacting to headlines. He was watching patterns form in real time. And years later, as Nicole's marriage to Keith Urban began to change in ways few people noticed, Russell wasn't just observing from a distance. He was close enough to see when something felt off. And that's where this story really begins. What made Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban's marriage seem untouchable wasn't perfection. It was what they survived. Just months after their wedding, Keith checked himself into rehab, a moment that would have ended most relationships before they even started. Instead, Nicole stayed. She stepped back from work, ignored the noise, and stood by him when walking away would have been easier. But her loyalty wasn't naive. She understood she couldn't save him. He had to do that himself. Her role was simply to hold the space. Against the odds, it worked. Keith later credited Nicole with giving him stability, and the world saw a marriage that had already beaten its biggest test, which is exactly why what came later caught everyone off guard. Because if they could survive that, then whatever broke them had to be something deeper and far more destructive. After surviving that early crisis, their marriage looked solid, unshakable, but a quieter threat began to creep in distance. Not dramatic fights or public scandals, just long stretches of separation that slowly changed everything. Keith's career kept him on the road for most of the year, moving from city to city, while Nicole lived a completely different life back home. They stayed connected through calls and messages, but distance has a way of creating silence where intimacy used to live. And silence leaves room for doubt. Keith later spoke about the loneliness of life on tour, waking up in unfamiliar places, cut off from family, questioning why he was even there. According to those close to the situation, that loneliness didn't stay contained. It followed him home. What started as time apart reportedly turned into emotional space neither of them knew how to close. And as that gap widened, the first warning signs quietly began to surface. Not in an obvious, headline-grabbing way, but in subtle shifts that are hard to explain and even harder to ignore. According to reports, Keith's behavior began to change. He allegedly became more guarded with his phone, more defensive over simple questions, and strangely distant even when he was home. Conversations felt shorter. Explanations felt vague. Nothing concrete, just enough to raise quiet concern. At the same time, his public praise for Nicole grew louder. Emotional speeches, grand declarations. To the outside world, it looked like devotion, but insiders suggest it may have been overcompensation, creating a flawless public image while something else played out privately. Nicole felt it. She didn't accuse. She observed. She watched patterns form and started trusting her instincts. And as small inconsistencies piled up, the unease became impossible to dismiss. Because when behavior changes without explanation, it's usually pointing to something deeper. The breaking point didn't come with a public scandal or a leaked headline. According to reports, it came quietly, late at night, in a moment Nicole hadn't planned but couldn't avoid. After months of unease, her worst suspicions were allegedly confirmed. Sources claim Nicole discovered messages on Keith's phone that crossed a line. Not vague, not innocent. The conversations reportedly suggested private meetups during times he had said he was working. For Nicole, this wasn't just about the messages themselves, it was the deception behind them. The timing made it worse. She was deep into an emotionally demanding role, already vulnerable, already stretched thin. And now, the doubts she had tried to suppress were staring back at her in undeniable form. According to those close to her, this was the moment everything shifted. The questions stopped, the excuses ended, and the marriage reached a point where pretending was no longer possible. Because once trust turns into proof, there's no going back. What happened next raised even more questions, because the end didn't look like most Hollywood divorces. There were no public fights, no competing statements, no drawn-out drama. Instead, everything unfolded quickly and quietly. According to reports, the legal process moved with unusual speed. The paperwork was clean, the settlement was settled early, and the silence from both sides was almost unnerving. To insiders, this didn't look like two people slowly drifting apart. It looked like a decision that had already been made. Details that later surfaced only fueled speculation. The custody arrangement, the financial terms, the lack of resistance. Everything suggested that one side held the leverage and the other knew it wasn't worth fighting. In Hollywood, silence like that usually isn't about peace. It's about containment. And according to those close to the situation, this silence was deliberate for a very specific reason. In Hollywood, there's an unspoken rule: friends don't talk. Especially not about divorces. Especially not when both people are A-list. That's why Russell Crowe allegedly speaking up sent shockwaves through the industry. He's not known for chasing headlines or feeding gossip. Quite the opposite, which is why insiders say his decision wasn't impulsive. It was protective. As the divorce news spread, a quiet narrative began forming. Keith as the misunderstood husband. Nicole as the distant one who walked away. According to those close to Russell, he couldn't let that stand. He had watched Nicole fight for that marriage longer than anyone knew. He had seen the loyalty, the patience, and the final line she refused to let be crossed again. This wasn't about revenge. It was about correcting the story without Nicole having to say a word. Because sometimes the truth doesn't come from the people at the center of the storm, but from the one person who stayed silent until it mattered most. In the end, this story isn't just about the collapse of a Hollywood marriage. It's about how Nicole Kidman chose to walk away from it. After nearly 2 decades of loyalty, sacrifice, and second chances, she didn't explode. She didn't perform heartbreak for the public. She closed the door quietly and on her own terms. While Keith Urban reportedly retreated from the spotlight, Nicole did the opposite. She kept working. She protected her children. She carried herself with the same control and dignity that has defined her entire career. No accusations, no counter-narratives, just silence and boundaries. And that's why Russell Crowe's role matters. Not to create drama, but to prevent a false story from becoming the truth. Because according to those closest to the situation, Nicole didn't abandon the marriage. She held on until there was nothing left to save. The fairy tale may be over, but the way she ended it revealed something far more lasting than romance: strength, restraint, and the kind of self-respect that doesn't need headlines to be understood.